Black Death hit when Chaucer was about 6, and decimated the population, of course. And so for men and women, there were real, different changes, because after the plague, where say maybe half the population died, maybe a third, maybe a half, and it affected young people as much as old people, children, completely devastating. The psychological impact is impossible, I think, for us to imagine, because our pandemic was not on anything like that scale, thank goodness. But afterwards, if you did survive, things got better, not psychologically, but socially and economically, because there's the same amount of land to be farmed, but half the workforce maybe to do it. So wages went up. The government tried to keep them down, didn't succeed. Wages went up. People could move about more. If they didn't get the wage they wanted, there were other places to get wages. People moved to towns more, and women moved to towns more, got more, and went more into the workforce. And you see at this time things like sumptuary laws, which were laws that tried to control what people could wear depending on their social class, and they didn't work. But the fact that we see those laws demonstrates an anxiety about social mobility in the second half of the 14th century. So second half of the 14th century and the 15th century, we see this this economic boom and lots of people working, and lots of women were working. People often imagine that most medieval women were living very domestic, limited lives, and that's not true. And it's really not true of England. England and the Low Countries, more so than other parts of Europe, had lots of women in the workforce, partly because they had good inheritance laws for women. They had traditions of later marriage, so women were not usually, the wife of Bath is married at 12. Most women in England were not marrying anything like that age. They were marrying, in their 20s, after they'd earned money for a few years. So they weren't having so many children. They were, they were able to inherit and keep inheritance from their husbands. So we see women working in lots and lots of different kinds of jobs, and that's even something like domestic service. It meant that they were able to leave their father's houses, save money, and then have choices over their husbands and sexual partners in a way that a 12 or 13-year-old being married off from the parental home, which was more what was happening in somewhere like Italy, they would have fewer choices, both economically and sexually.
There was something called the marriage pattern then in the north, in England, was there?
Yeah,
so that was sort of, you could have a career of marriage, like the wife of Bath seems to have done.
Yeah, you could. So it's two different kinds of patterns. So I think the European marriage pattern, which is a term which economists and historians use, and that's this marriage pattern that particularly pertains in Northwestern Europe at this time, which involved later marriage. It involved both partners usually working to earn money. It's something called neolocality, which is when you form a new household after marriage rather than staying with your parents or in-laws. So again, it gives you more autonomy. Fewer children, so those children were then more invested in. Both women and men participating in the economy, women inheriting and being protected. So all those kinds of things. And the European marriage pattern was, I think, really crucial economically for England. But then the kind of marriage pattern that you were also talking about in terms of multiple marriage, in the bit that I talked about, like that I read out from the opening of the Wife of Bath's prologue, she talks about the fact that the church fathers had condemned multiple marriage and said, second marriages aren't real marriages and so on. But that would have made no sense within Chaucer's world, just as it doesn't make sense to most people today. The Wife of Bath is talking about attitudes of the church, which her contemporary society did not believe in, because it was very normal for women to marry many times, to be widowed and then to marry many times. And, I tell the stories in the book about women such as Margaret Stodeye, great London heiress, who Chaucer would certainly have known, who married 4 times, was twice Lady Mayoress, and then after her 4th husband had died, took a vow of chastity.
I did no more.
That decided that was enough. But so many really, really interesting examples of women who, Catherine Neville with her the Duchess with her teenage husband when she was 65. All these fascinating women who really were very powerful. So widows and multiple marriage was very normal at this time. And
Chaucer would have known women like that. Pretty powerful.
Oh yeah, lots and lots of them. Absolutely. And Chaucer really, straddled different social groups. So he was the son of a vintner, a wine merchant, brought up in London, in the area of London that had lots of immigrants in it, lots of trade. He was watching the ships coming in from as far afield as Indonesia. His grandmother was married 3 times. His mother married more than once. He had, he was surrounded by these important mercantile women. But then he also worked in the court, so his first job was as a page boy for the wife of, so someone called Elizabeth, Countess of Ulster, who was the wife of Lionel of Antwerp, one of the sons of Edward III. And he went on later to work for John of Gaunt and also for Edward III and Richard II. So he also knows and is part of the kind of the royal court and that more aristocratic milieu. And in both of those worlds, he knew lots of powerful women.